What if I told you that the world as you know it, the fast-paced, mobile society we inhabit, began not in a gleaming laboratory, but in a damp, dimly lit shed in Detroit? In the late 19th century, the world moved at the speed of a horse. Life was dictated by the rising sun and the physical limits of muscle and bone. For most, the horizon was a distant, unreachable line, and travel was a luxury reserved for those with gold in their pockets and time to waste. Yet, amidst the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves on cobblestones, a silent revolution was brewing. A man named Henry Ford was obsessed with a vision that seemed like madness to his contemporaries. He didn't just want to build a machine, he wanted to build a future where every family could conquer distance. To understand the man, you must first look at the soil he despised. Henry was born on a farm in Michigan, a place where labor was backbreaking and relentless. While his father saw the beauty in a straight furrow and a bountiful harvest, Henry saw only inefficiency. He hated the mindless repetition of manual farm work. To him, the horse was a limited, temperamental engine that required constant fuel even when it wasn't working. He began to see machines not as mere tools, but as the ultimate liberators of humanity. His drive was never fueled by a simple desire for wealth. Instead, he was possessed by a singular, democratic obsession. He wanted to take the impossible technology of the horseless carriage and place it within the reach of the average person. He envisioned a world where the farmer, the baker, and the factory hand could own a piece of the future. But the path to glory was paved with humiliating failures. In 1899, he convinced investors to back the Detroit Automobile Company. It was supposed to be his grand entrance, but Henry was a perfectionist to a fault. He spent months tinkering with prototypes while the company's capital withered away. The cars he eventually produced were too expensive and of low quality. By 1901, the company collapsed. The city's elite whispered that Ford was a dreamer who lacked the grit for real business. Undeterred, he tried again with the Henry Ford Company. Here, the tension reached a breaking point. His investors, led by William Murphy, wanted immediate profits and a car for the wealthy. Henry, however, was still chasing his universal car. The clash of egos was explosive. Henry walked away from his own namesake, leaving his reputation in tatters, while his former backers turned his designs into what would eventually become Cadillac. At 40 years old, Henry was labeled a two-time loser. Most men would have returned to the farm, defeated by the weight of their own mistakes. Instead, Henry made a last-chance gamble. In 1903, he founded the Ford Motor Company with a meager $28,000 scraped together from 12 nervous investors. The stakes were absolute. If this venture failed, his career was effectively over. He poured every ounce of his frustration and genius into a new design, the Model T. It was light, sturdy, and designed to be repaired by anyone with a wrench and a bit of common sense. It wasn't a toy for the elite, it was a rugged tool for the common man. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. When the Model T finally hit the streets, the response was unlike anything the industry had ever seen. Orders flooded in from every corner of the country. But success brought a terrifying new problem. The demand was so explosive that his small factory couldn't keep up. Customers were waiting months, and the pressure was mounting. Henry realized that his current methods were failing him. He was standing on the precipice of losing everything to the very success he had dreamed of. The success of the Model T was a double-edged sword that threatened to stifle the Ford Motor Company before it could truly soar. By 1912, the world was clamoring for the Tin Lizzie, but the production methods were failing to meet the moment. Highly skilled mechanics moved from car to car, hauling heavy parts and fitting them by hand in a slow, artisanal process. This resulted in a staggering backlog of orders that left customers frustrated. Henry watched as his dream of a universal car began to buckle under the weight of its own popularity. He knew that if he couldn't find a way to build cars significantly faster, his competitors would quickly devour the market he had worked so hard to create. The atmosphere in the Detroit factory was thick with tension, a frantic race against time that traditional craftsmanship was destined to lose. The breakthrough came from an unlikely and somewhat macabre source. During a visit to a Chicago slaughterhouse, Henry observed the disassembly line, where animal carcasses moved on overhead trolleys while workers performed specialized tasks at each station. A spark of genius ignited in his mind. He realized that the secret to true volume wasn't in the individual speed of the worker, but in the relentless rhythm of the process itself. He asked a radical question. What if the work comes to the man instead of the man going to the work? In 1913, at the Highland Park plant, he put this theory into practice. They started simply using a winch and a sturdy rope to pull a chassis across the floor. The results were instantaneous and transformative. The time it took to assemble a single Model T plummeted from over 12 hours to a mere 90 minutes. This was the birth of the moving assembly line, a revolution that would redefine the industrial world forever. Production numbers skyrocketed, and for the first time in history, the price of a car began to drop significantly every single year. However, this miracle of efficiency came with a dark, psychological price for those on the floor. The factory, once a place of prideful skill, became a theater of monotonous repetition. Workers were no longer builders. They were becoming mere cogs in a colossal, uncaring machine. They stood in one spot for hours, performing the same task until their minds grew numb. The turnover rate became a crisis of its own. In 1913, Ford had to hire nearly 53,000 men just to maintain a stable workforce of 14,000. The Ford way was efficient, but it was breaking the human spirit. Faced with a complete collapse of his labor force, Henry Ford unleashed his most controversial masterstroke. In January 1914, he announced the $5 day. At a time when the average industrial wage was around $2, Ford essentially doubled his workers' pay overnight while shortening the workday. The news hit the world like a lightning bolt. Critics on Wall Street were horrified, labeling him a traitor to his class and a dangerous socialist who was ruining the American economy. Industrialists feared that this reckless generosity would lead to a national uprising of laborers demanding the same treatment. But Henry was no socialist. He was a calculating visionary. He understood that by paying his workers enough to afford the products they were building, he was creating the very consumer market that would sustain his empire. The gamble paid off spectacularly. Turnover vanished, and thousands of men lined up in the freezing Detroit winter just for a chance at a job. He had effectively industrialized the American dream, proving that high wages and low prices could coexist if the system was efficient enough. Yet, as Ford became the richest man on the planet, his legendary stubbornness began to morph into a dangerous arrogance. He grew increasingly rigid, dismissing the advice of his son, Edsel Ford, regarding the urgent need for innovation. He famously declared that customers could have any color as long as it was black. This refusal to adapt, born from the very ego that built his empire, was about to set the stage for a confrontation that would nearly destroy his entire legacy. Success had transformed Henry Ford from a radical disruptor into a rigid monarch. By the mid-1920s, the Model T, once a miracle of engineering, was rapidly becoming a relic. Henry's absolute refusal to innovate became the company's greatest liability, a weight that threatened to sink the very empire he had bled to build. He famously declared that a customer could have a car painted any color so long as it was black, an obsession with mechanical standardization over the evolving desires of the human spirit. While the world was changing and people craved style, Henry remained anchored to the past. convinced that his original formula was infallible and the common people would simply take precisely what he gave them. This stagnation opened a massive door for rivals like General Motors. While Ford offered a single utility vehicle, GM began to offer a car for every person purpose, introducing different colors and better engines that made the Model T look like a motorized carriage from a forgotten century. Ford's market share bled away to competitors who understood that the consumer wanted a reflection of their own identity. Inside the factory, the fierce tension reached a boiling point between Henry and his son, Edsel Ford. Edsel was a man of vision who saw the writing on the wall. He pleaded with his father to modernize, but Henry, driven by pride, often publicly humiliated Edsel, dismissing his ideas as fancies. The future of the empire hung in the balance of a father's ego. By 1927, sales were plummeting, and Chevrolet was becoming the new king of the road. In a move that shocked the industry, Henry made the agonizing decision to kill the Model T. He shut down production entirely for 6 months. The massive assembly lines went silent, and a heavy stillness fell over Detroit. Tens of thousands of workers were laid off while the global economy held its breath. Skeptics claimed that Ford was finished, unable to survive a transition to a new era. The pressure was suffocating, and the world watched with a mixture of pity and anticipation. The silence ended with the arrival of the Model A. It was a triumph of engineering that proved Henry, with Edsel's influence on its design, could indeed adapt. The new car featured a sliding gear transmission and a variety of stunning colors. On the day of its unveiling, millions of people crowded into showrooms just to catch a glimpse. It was a redemption that solidified the Ford legacy, proving that while systems are vital, the ability to evolve those systems is what ensures long-term survival. Henry Ford's true legacy was the creation of the modern middle class. By standardizing production and raising wages, he turned luxury into a commodity. This Fordism became the blueprint for the global supply chain, influencing every major industry from aerospace to electronics. Today, the core principle he pioneered remains the foundation for modern titans of industry like Tesla and Amazon. It is the simple, powerful promise: simplify the process, multiply the results. By breaking down complex problems into manageable steps, any visionary can achieve the impossible. Henry Ford began as a man who hated farm drudgery and ended as the architect of the machine age. His journey teaches us that while hard work is necessary, smart systems truly change the world. Are we working hard, or are we building systems that work for us? The story of Ford is a testament to the power of a single idea and the courage to change when that idea is no longer enough. If you found this journey inspiring, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of the greatest visionaries. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story of how one person can reshape reality. What do you think was Ford's greatest contribution, the assembly line or the $5 day? Let us know in the comments today.